So this is always my hardest slide, people. Look, never in my wildest dreams, taking to the stage in March, accepting my state award, would I or anyone have envisaged everything my award stood for would come under global scrutiny weeks later. Competitive sailing throughout my childhood with my dad and my granddad formed my life's mantra, which was make my own path. I had a stay-at-home mum, a tradesperson as a dad, and three sisters, but we weren't bound by stereotypes, not at all. And basically, it was about working hard and anything could be achieved. Maths and science at school was my pathway to a science degree, leaving home at 17 to become the first person in my family to go to university. My life has been a quest to forge my own path, championing change. For 20 years, I've worked for various mining sector organisations. I wanted to be successful. I wanted a family. I wanted to work part-time and still be thought of as career-focused and professional. My criteria and working values were not going to change, and the workforce had to change with me. Today, companies are embracing diversity and inclusion. Yet before my award and then COVID, the biggest workforce challenge continued to be flexibility in the way we work, whether it be part-time or remotely. I worked this way for 17 years, leading major projects and functional teams. Everything from enterprise performance, from a strategy perspective, cultural transformation, digitisation work, human capital, and most recently leading our COVID emergency response across 4 countries. I'm also now helping rural, regional, and remote women reach their potential and have a voice through a not-for-profit board role. Over this period of time, I formed the first job share arrangement in one organisation, and I've been the first senior leader to work flexibly in many others, leading teams from 5 people to 150 people. I continue to challenge my bosses to value my talent, my contribution, my results, and my career aspirations when I didn't want to work full time.
Sarah, we seem to have lost contact with you. Everything okay?
Sorry.
She's been muted.
I'm back. Where did you hear to? I've pressed the mute button. That was clever. Where did you get to?
Where you wanted to work part-time and
yes.
you challenged your bosses.
Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. I challenged my bosses. Yes, I did. Thanks, guys. To value my talent, my contributions, my results, and career aspirations when I didn't want to work full time. I did also have to hide it. I was harassed. I missed out on career opportunities and even had one woman tell me to stop wasting my time and choose between a career and being a parent. I didn't waver. I had the help of my husband. Our household proved it could be done. We thought it was normal, and it could now well be the new normal. So that's a little bit about me. Let's get on to some content. Flexible work. It goes by many names. All of them are just work, and it just depends on your preference, point of view, and or cultural fit for the organisation you're in. All definitions of flexible work include elements of the following. It's a change in employees' hours of work, patterns of work, or location of work. It's usually the ability to have some control over when, where, and how the work is accomplished. And it's an employers and employees making arrangements about working conditions that suit them. Working arrangements, anything other than the traditional 9 to 5. What about some stats? So, part-time work, 2018, about 31% of the workforce were working part-time, which is defined by the Australian government as less than 35 hours per week. Interestingly, that percentage has actually been just over 30% since 2013. It's actually a bit higher than I thought when I went looking. Look, but when you think about it, it's reflecting demographics. We've got more women and older workers in the workplace. We've got structural changes in terms of the type of jobs and personal circumstances where there's been more recognition and accommodation of things like study, family care, and other personal commitments. So of those that are working part-time, 69% are women. Then I went, okay, so what percentage of people are working remotely? So for more than 20 years, the proportion of Australian workers working from home hasn't budged. It's been sitting around that 4 to 5%, despite technology advances, particularly in the last 5 to 7 years, that would have enabled them to do so. A legacy of COVID and lockdowns is sure to be a step change. The question is to what extent? And I'm sure you've all read different versions. Some say 10, some say 30, some say 50. I've even read one employer saying 80. So the 4 to 5% shifting to at least 10% is a conservative guess all the way through. So, why this structural change to flexible work? So, first of all, a structural change actually refers to a dramatic shift in the way a country, an industry, or a market operates. And it's usually brought on by a major economic development. As we know, in this case, it's been brought on by a virus and a global pandemic. So, structural change shifts the assumptions and beliefs that are used to determine courses of actions. So, a great example of this one is the smartphone. Where would we be without the smartphone? It's certainly a structural change to that industry. We certainly, in terms of flexible work, had it happen rapidly and it happened en masse. Everyone had to do it. There weren't options. Adjustments had to be made. We all made mistakes and we all looked silly on Zoom. We still do, maybe. Women and men worked remotely. For many men, it was the first time in their careers that they've ever worked remotely. We learnt that it did work, and all of a sudden, the previous blockages, reasons, or difficulties were suddenly fixed or dropped. Many productivity and possibility myths were busted. We changed views on how work got done. The office was suddenly defunct. We got good on technology and quickly. We devised ways to meet, speak, collaborate, solve problems all out of the workplace. And things changed. Most reported the same productivity, if not better. Our global environments got healthy because there were less people moving around. Offices were closed, with many not reopening. And employee health, stress, life balance improved or changed. Not sure though whether homeschooling was an improvement in our well-being though, or less stressful. So, what about the elements that made this, what I call pandemic remote work so well? So the previous slide we talked about why was it a structural change. Now I want to talk about why this pandemic remote work worked so well. Our existing social relationships and communities were already there. They'd been established predominantly through our face-to-face, office-based workplace interactions. When we went remotely, we could use those relationships through a virtual engagement. We were also highly valuing our jobs. Many did lose their jobs. I don't think any of us didn't have a family, a friend, or an associate who didn't lose their job. Those who kept their jobs in whatever form were very appreciative and did everything to keep them. It was certainly short-term and emergency response. It was originally, we didn't know how long it was going to be. So the anxiety and concern drove that short-term energy enthusiasm. Everyone was in. There was no stigma. No one was different. Those who could work remotely did. Nothing to do with preferences, backgrounds, cultures, gender, generation, family, you name it. And of course, our collaboration technology, it all of a sudden went from nice to have to essential. And without our digital employee and customer channels, we would really have struggled. So, big question, can it work long term? Everyone is asking. But how do we deal with things like this? People are now saying, okay, so if the productivity didn't change, how do we sustain it once the pandemic resides? Collaboration. It was one of the reasons where if people reported unproductive hours, that it was predominantly because of a lack of or a difficulty with collaborating remotely. How do we deal with innovation and the impacts there in terms of creativity? So companies are shifting their focus on rebuilding the top line in an environment that's pressing for changes in products and or service offerings. We've also got remote work raising questions around how effective teams will be in the long run when they engage new clients, when they help onboard new staff. Carolyn was saying just before we started, 4 new staff members in their office, yet it's not their office. So some of them have only met a handful of times. And lastly, where are the appropriate remote work locations? Our homes need to change or have changed. Those fancy cushions on the couch have made way for a very practical desk space. And community hubs may grow or be created such that people are staying within their communities. So what I'd propose to you are what are the key principles when considering yours and or your employees' requests for ongoing flexible work options? What I'd suggest first and foremost is start with the role and classify them. So which ones can be done remotely, which ones have to be on site, which can be a hybrid, and some may be a hybrid through emergency situations only. And there's a couple of factors that you'd want to consider when determining this. How critical the role is, how much collaboration is required for excellence, both within the team and across teams. You'd also be looking at team leadership requirements, and you'd also be seeing which tasks have to be site-based or workplace-based. Trust is sacred. If we don't trust to get work done remotely, then it's just not possible. So as long as deadlines are met, then you should be trusting that work can get done. I can hear someone there in the background. Just in terms of the mute. Thank you. Flexibility is a two-way street, certainly when it's given by employers when they need it. But then on the flip side, when businesses' demands require it, then employees should also be prepared to give more as well. It's not possible to have one-size-fits-all approach. Let the individual and or the teams figure out what will work best as long as excellent work is delivered on time. Everyone deserves flexibility. One person's reasons for needing flexibility is no more or less important than another's. And it's not about working less. Flexibility is about working differently. The last term I would throw in there is a collaborative individualism. Essentially, what I'm meaning there is that individual arrangements must also meet the overall team requirements. So let me give you an example. If a person wants to work from 6 till 2 p.m, but the team needs to provide a 9 to 5 coverage, then how are you as a leader and or as an individual requesting this flexible work pattern, allowing for the needs of the business and the team as well? So these new ways of work will also require a new or a different type of leadership. This will have to be taught. Flexible work to be effective has to be endorsed, promoted and role modelled in practical ways by our leaders, underpinned by trust, accountability and support. This ability to inclusively lead flexible teams, irrespective of location, I think will be a differentiating leadership capability that organisations are looking for, if not now, absolutely into the future. And views on the effectiveness of workplace flexibility often reflect a combination of a leader's perspective, experiences, and their own capability, as much as it is about an employee's flexible work effectiveness. So, as an employer, bring it down to 3 things. What can we do? First and foremost, capability should be our first care. You know, we should be getting the best capability possible and keeping the best capability possible. Who really cares what way they do the work in? If you have the best people, then talk about what configuration is going to work both for their individual circumstances as well as the work culture. Secondly, focus on results, not time in the office. And thirdly, I'd say trust, trust, trust. If you haven't got this, it actually doesn't matter whether the employee works in the workplace or remotely. You've got a hiring issue. So by focusing on outcomes, strategies like these help employees make their time count instead of simply counting time. So don't measure success by how many hours your employees work. Instead, focus on what they are accomplishing. For individuals, own it and sell your capability. You've got this. Know what you can do and how best you can do it. That's what you bring to a company and that's what you bring to an employer is your unique skill set and the way in which you deploy it. Secondly, talk about results. People want to know what you can deliver with that capability. And of course, agree the results and the time frame those results to be delivered in. And quite frankly, the way in which you deliver that result to the agreed date should be able to be negotiated. And stay in touch and available. Regularly checking in. It's not just it's not about just picking up the phone when you get called. It's about over communicating things like problems, issues, challenges, but also positively looking at ideas and suggestions and opportunities. And those regular check-ins should be facilitating a conversation around what's working with your flexible work arrangement, what's not with your manager, and what changes might be required from both parties for it to be more effective. What to watch out for? For us as individuals, blurring is risky. Create work patterns that work for you, your employer, and your family, but be very conscious of how you delineate between work and or personal or family time and lines. Don't underestimate the value of maintaining and developing your networks. Those virtual water cooler chats are still important whether you're in the workplace or not, and the access to your career opportunities aren't necessarily formally done and often based on informal relationships. And this presenteeism, it can happen at home as well as in the workplace. More hours than required or working when unwell, it isn't healthy in either location. For employers, check these 4 things. Watch when your employees may want to bargain. You might start to hear that reasonable tasks are negotiated down to a lesser output. You might also see some outsourcing being suggested or happening, that key tasks that are within their job may be passed on to others. There could also be some waiting going on when work's only performed when they're asked to do it instead of actively seeking that work and making contributions. And there may also be some erosion going on where a person may be just doing enough because someone else is hosing down some positivity. I think I'm just about at the time. I said that I would be at Carolyn. So in terms of wrapping up some of my content, what I'd suggest to all of you is how do you create your own paths? And based on my own experiences, these have been a few of the things that remind me about what I've created and why I created it over those, what are now decades. You do you. My kids have been telling me this for some time. They apparently get told it a lot or used to get told it a lot at high school, but I just love it. Don't try to be someone else or copy what works for them. Find out what works for you and own it. Grit. It was a term that I came across a couple of years ago. Some of you may have read the book. I used to call it bloody mindedness, but basically it's about having those guts, the resilience, the initiative and the tenacity. It won't necessarily be gifted to you. Believe in what you're seeking and make it work, make it happen. That grit will pay off over time. I popped in something there around leadership, and that's not whether you're in a formal leadership position or not. I think it's leadership of self. And the point here is, I remember thinking back when I was, 20 or whatever it might be, that I should have known all the answers. Why don't I know this? I should know this. But the reality is, stop asking yourself that futile question. It's actually about asking the right questions. So, we don't have to know all the answers. As long as we're asking the right questions of ourselves and our others, then that's going to stand us in good stead. This one is only more recently to myself, but certainly resonated. You'll never speak to anyone more to yourself. And where we do that is in our heads. Be kind. And often we are the toughest judges of ourselves. And I think that's something that no matter how much we say, it's very hard to do in practice. But that kind piece for me really resonated. And look, this last one, don't try and win over the haters. And the bit that's not on the screen is you're not the jackass whisperer. Not all will support the approach that you choose. My point here is it's not your job to convince them. If you believe in it yourself and you're doing you, then that's the right thing. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Jo. I think we should have a virtual round of applause from everybody there. And I have got a question, Jo, for you from Michelle. And she asks, how do you tackle trust issues that are present around flexible working? I'll put the camera back on and we'll take off your thank you. It'd be nice to see you, Jo.
Yeah, okay, hang on a minute.
Oh, thank you for the claps there, Ravi.
Can you still see my screen? You can.
Yes, I can still see your screen. So if you just stop sharing and put your camera on, I think will be good. But if that's too hard, don't worry. I'm sure everyone would just like some questions. There we are.
There we go, back. Fantastic, thank you. So how do we deal with trust issues from an employer, I presume?
Yes, I think that's what Michelle means. Could you confirm that? Michelle, maybe you want to pop your microphone on and just ask that question yourself. Jo, we've only got your little signature thing there. We don't actually have your camera.
You can't actually see me. Sorry, Carolyn, was that what you said?
Yeah, that's correct. Can't see you.
Sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, how you going? Great talk today. Thank you for that. I just had a question. You were talking around, trust is key. And I was just wondering how you tackle trust issues around flexible working and probably more directed at the managers.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Look, I'm sorry, I can't show myself. I don't know what I'm doing.
No, you're there. That was me, not you.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Carolyn. Look, I think what my advice would be is you start small and you start in having a real conversation with your direct manager. You articulate what you're looking for and why. Hopefully you can come up with an arrangement. And most importantly, I think trust is earned, and trust is based on results and doing what you say you do. So those regular check-ins that I mentioned, in the start of a new arrangement, you might be checking in weekly with your manager to say, hey, it's working well for me. How's it working for you? Or when we did this thing, I thought we could have done this part a little bit better. Do you have any other feedback for me? I think ultimately it's a conversation, and it's a conversation that happens over time.
And thank you for that question, Michelle.
Thank you, Jo.
We've got a question from Andrew now, who asks, have you got a way to measure engagement, not just subjective approach we might do in an office environment?
Yeah. So engagement collectively, there's the normal tools. Many employers use an engagement survey as a way in which to get a gauge. Many employers these days use pulse surveys, which happen on a more regular basis. There are more advanced tools now that use everything from algorithms that actually look at the type of meetings you're having, the topics of the meetings, the emails, and who you're engaging with to say whether or not you're engaged or disengaged. So I think there's a range of tools depending on the investment that you're looking for. What all of those give you is essentially a baseline to have the right discussion in a lead team about your culture and, quite frankly, the performance of results within the environment that you're creating for those results to be delivered.
Thanks, Jo. And Bernadette asks, how can we encourage more men to take up flexible working opportunities? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Bernadette. I think one of the biggest things that COVID has brought to us is the opportunity for men to work remotely. As I said before, for many, potentially the first time in their careers, many women have chosen to or took opportunities through having children. Where I remember when I had my first child, I had all of the ahas of what it meant to work remotely. And if you don't have that experience, then it's very hard, I think, for men to realise what that's like, the good, the bad, the ugly, and what's possible. I think COVID has really just changed that really quickly. Many of my professional colleagues, mates, and family are now going, why would I go back to the old arrangement? Having said that, what I would say to you is that most employers are talking about hybrid arrangements. And the reason I'm putting that out there is that for success to be long term in remote work relationships, there's a lot of social elements that you only get when there is some type of shared workplace. So a lot of what is evolving is around what the nature of that hybrid arrangement, and that tends to depend on roles, it depends on industry, it depends on the function and individuals.
Thanks so much, Jo. That's a great answer. And Courtney asks if you have any advice on creating and maintaining these kind of flexible relationships with a mentor, whether you're physically distant or working flexible hours.
Look, I think with a mentor, it's really straightforward, really easy. You have a conversation that says what time works for you and what time doesn't. Last night I was having a conversation with 3 women, one of which was travelling via car from Brisbane back to a remote property and was holed up in a hotel in, I think it was Gin. The other woman was on her way home in the car, and I myself was at home by that time having dinner. So I think technology and the collaborative tools that technology is providing, I mean, look at even with Teams, if people have been using Teams, the functionality's improved so much since March because of the feedback and because of the developers actually knowing that it is going to continue to be used in the future.
Right, well, that's all the questions I have in the chat at the moment. This is a final chance if anyone wants to open up their microphone and just ask Jo one-on-one a final 1 or 2 questions. No, it looks like you've answered all the questions that were out there, Jo, so well done indeed. Although I just have another one coming from Will, who says, would it be fair to say that it took the COVID-19 shake-up for a further trust between workplace leaders / business and their workers? In particular, people can be trusted to work in a home environment and actually perform better with higher productivity.
Yeah, look, Will, thanks for the question. I think absolutely COVID busted some myths, where previously, I can think of a senior manager that had never previously had much experience of remote work and just didn't see how it could be possible, and was very verbal about that. And post-COVID, he is the first to admit that he said, I didn't believe it, I never supported it. I now know that it works and I now know that it's possible. And I'm absolutely prepared to engage in those conversations with my people now about what that might look like moving forward. And that to me is a win. Transformation happens one-on-one. It doesn't happen by group just because we want to. The structural change because of COVID has sped those individual transformations up to an unprecedented degree, and that's why we're getting the type of responsiveness that we are now, which is fantastic.
Thank you, Jo. And I do have another question from Marie-Louise, and she asks, how has Hastings Deering directly changed its flexible / remote working policies since COVID?
Yeah, look, thank you. And Hastings, like many employers, have learnt many lessons from COVID. And we have gone from very small amounts of ad hoc flexible work arrangements, to opening up the discussion on a much broader scale now. Remembering we have site-based requirements, there is a large proportion of our workplace that weren't offered the opportunity to work remotely, but we were also really fortunate with our other mining peers to be able to work through COVID, and we took that privilege and respected that very highly in terms of the conditions we maintained for those who couldn't work remotely. So yes, we've had a big change, and those discussions are now ongoing about what we call work remotely and flexible work.
Thanks so much again, Jo. And Karina asks, what would be your advice for someone who is trying to re-enter the workforce and needs more flexible options? Do you apply for a job and request it, or seek out employers with flexible options already available? Trying to establish trust will obviously be a major challenge.
Yeah, thanks. Perfect question. So when I had my twins, the 1 + 1 = 3. I was only wanting to work part-time after that, and we also had moved back from Mount Isa, and when I was in the market, I was getting lots of responsiveness from employers, but they only wanted me full-time because that was the only configuration that they were used to, and this is a little while ago now. And what actually ended up happening was I went to an employer who said, I don't care how we get you in terms of your capability, you're the experience and capabilities that we need to do the work we need done. What configuration is going to work for you with 3 young children? Now, I also worked, I took a pay cut to go to that organisation, and it didn't worry me at all because I was doing the right work in the right place, versus not working at all because I just don't think I would have survived at that point in time. So you're absolutely right. To more specifically answer your question, I would apply for jobs because back then no one did ask for flexible work. And then if they were interested in my capability, I would then have the conversation openly to say, what options are there? To explore this because I'm really interested in the work, but as an individual, these things are also really important to me in terms of my work-life balance.
Thanks again, Jo. And we spoke just before we started today about people becoming disengaged. So
Yes.
How does the employer handle an employee who's becoming disengaged, doesn't want to come back into the office? Or indeed, if you're the disengaged one, how do you get your mojo back with your job and your career?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. That's absolutely real. We all look, depending on where you're dialing in from, in Queensland anyway, we've all been able as office-based workers to be back in the workplace since I think the start of July-ish. But regardless of that technical piece, there's been individually people being very concerned, whether it be from their health perspective or from a work-life balance perspective in terms of returning. The approach that we've taken at Hastings, whether it's right or wrong, is we've got a COVID-safe workplace. And we've encouraged and have all of our people back in the workplace. And then we work through with them around what they're looking for in terms of their flexible work options at an individual level moving forward post a pandemic, because it is different. When we sent people home through the pandemic, they had no choice. And we had to make it work. Now that we're actually having a different discussion about what type of work arrangement people are looking for in, yes, a COVID world, but hopefully not one that's locked down like we have been and are still in many parts of the country.
Thanks so much, Jo. And Ravi just, who's had to leave us, but made a comment saying that he worked for Telstra for 15 years and was fortunate to always enjoy a flexible working environment, and also worked for Hastings during the COVID-19 this year in business intelligence and data analytics. So that's interesting work. So